Hi everyone. It's great to be part of this event. So I'll just kick off. So what I'm going to talk about, like Tracy said, is primary production, food loss and waste. So this was the first time that food loss and waste was measured or looked at the primary production stage in Ireland. So this was work that Tracy and myself did a couple of years ago, and it was funded by the EPA. So the project was called the Efficient Food Project. We looked at all the different food sectors to try and come up with an estimate essentially for what was happening in primary food production. So that's everything up until the farm gate or up until the fishing boat. So these are all the different foods that we looked at. So we looked at all the major food groups, or all the major foods that were produced that are being produced in Ireland. So that includes everything in agriculture, of course, but also aquaculture and fishing. And so for each of the foods that you can see over there, so I won't go through them one by one, of course, today, because that'll take very long. But for example, we would have looked at everything in detail. So we would have interviewed 51 different people, 51 different experts and producers from the different sectors. And so, for example, for potatoes, we would know that, there's 7% losses, for example, due to storage, and maybe 2% due to harvesting issues, and so on and so forth. So that's the level of detail that we have through all of these. And through the interviews that we did, we would have established averages, I guess, or estimates for all of that, and then we'd be able to extrapolate that to the estimated national value for food waste for each of those foods. And so when we did that, the food loss and waste total that we got to was 190,000 tons every single year, which is fairly significant. You can see the amounts of food waste that are happening in the other stages of the food supply chain here in the picture as well. However, what we reported to the European Commission is only 70,000 tons. So this is the figure that you'll see published everywhere for Ireland. And the reason for that is that the European Commission only looks at food waste if the food that's wasted, in essence, has officially entered the supply chain. So that means that it's been harvested. But of course, all food that is being grown for the purpose of food is a food waste anyway. So they classify those as a food loss. So anything that's unharvested, for example, if it doesn't have a market, or if it gets attacked by any crops that are attacked by pests and diseases, any animals that die on the farms, those are classified as a loss. But that adds up to 120,000 tons of food every single year. So it's fairly significant. So it's the 190,000 tons, I guess, that we're more interested in, even though you'll see the 70,000 tons published elsewhere. So that's the total that we came up with. But if we break that down, so I suppose the blue columns over here will show you the tonnages of food waste that happens in every single sector, whereas the red columns will show you the percentage of food lost or wasted for all of those sectors. So for example, if we look at aquaculture, you can see that there is a very large percentage of all the food. There's 35% of all the food that's being produced is being wasted. So that means that the sector is quite inefficient. However, because the sector is so small, that amounts to a very low tonnage of food waste every year. Whereas the opposite happens in animal husbandry. There's only 0.5% of food that's being wasted in that sector. So it's a very efficient sector. It's very heavily regulated as well. But however, the sector is very, very large. So there is a decent amount of tonnage there. But again, because that's only 0.5%, the sector is very efficient already. So there's not huge issues there. However, the obvious column that you'll see over here is the issues in horticulture. So there's 21% of everything that's produced in horticulture is lost or wasted. So that's very, very significant for a sector that isn't very, very big, but is quite big. And big enough to produce almost 130,000 tons of food waste every single year in Ireland. So that's food being wasted before it even leaves the farm. So I'll focus on that a little bit more and go into the reasons. We have reasons for all the different types of food waste that's happening, but I'll just focus on horticulture today. So there would have been two major issues that we would have seen, or two main issues. So one of the main reasons was due to a lack of holistic farming methods on the side of the producers themselves. So not working with nature, for example, and this can leave them very susceptible to pests and diseases and weather-related disruptions and so on. However, another major issue that we saw was issues with contracts with retailers. So for example, the largest reason that you'll see over here is the 31% is not saleable. So this is the dark red, almost brown color over here. And that's 31% of all of the food waste that happens at farm level is because the crops are not saleable. So this means they're out of spec. So they're maybe too large or too small, or they're a little bit damaged, for example. And that can often happen because the retailers have specific contracts with the producers that are very strict, which means that a lot of the producers have to overproduce to make sure that they have the right amount of produce that the contract requires to make sure that they're able to keep their contracts. So that does lead to a lot of food waste. So throughout the project, we came up with a number of goals and policy actions as well. So I'll just quickly go through the 6 goals that we identified in terms of recommendations to prevent food loss and waste. So the first was the widespread adoption of low food loss and waste practices. So these are things that we know already, that many people are already doing, but isn't necessarily as widespread as it could be, like crop rotations, for example, simple things like that, that could still be improved. And the next was improving production and food redistribution infrastructure. So food redistribution infrastructure is things like logistical supports for donations and for food donations, so to take that surplus food and donate it to charities. And there's Even here today who will talk to you about some of the work that Food Cloud and ourselves have been doing on that. And in terms of production infrastructure, for example, cover cropping would be an example of that. The next is the total value chain stakeholder collaboration and commitments for food loss and waste reduction. So that means essentially, because I spoke about earlier, what we saw was that there was a large issue in primary production due to their contracts with retailers, even though that's further down the food supply chain. The issue, the solutions to that wouldn't only come from the producers, but it would come from agreements with retailers as well. So things like having regulations against unfair trading practices would support that. The next is an increase in trade through shorter food supply chains. So the food supply chain is very long. There's different stages that food gets to from the farm to our plates, of course. And so like I spoke about in the beginning, so food will go from primary production to processing and manufacturing and retail and distribution and other steps before it gets to our plates in food service or household. But if we shorten the food supply chain, we can skip the steps, like skip certain processing steps and very long distribution chains. Food can go straight from the primary producers, from the farmers, for example, to ourselves, to the houses or food service and restaurants. And that means skipping all of the food waste that happens, the significant food waste that happens, particularly in processing and manufacturing. So that's a very simple thing that we can do to have a significant impact on food loss and waste. And you'll hear a lot more about short food supply chains in the next couple of talks as well. And the next is to increase the national food processing capacity. So this would basically be a way to take a lot of the surplus food or the food that's out of spec and process it. And so, for example, through small sort of localized processing facilities or co-owned between farmers processing facilities to allow them to maybe chop that up and freeze it and sell it to a different market if it doesn't make it into supermarkets, for example. And the last goal that we had there was producer resource sharing to support food loss and waste prevention. So that would mean sharing resources in terms of maybe them sharing storage facilities, or farmers sort of creating co-ops to co-own storage facilities or other processing facilities that they may need. So those are the main sort of actions that we're suggesting. There's a lot more in the report and in all the work that we did, but I'll keep it short for today. So that's everything that I've been talking about and more is in our final report. And so that's on the EPA's website, and that's called Food Loss and Waste from Farming, Fishing and Aquaculture in Ireland. And so if you need any more information about that, you can go ahead and find the report, or feel free to stay on and ask questions later on, but you can also email me if you like. So that's all for me. Thanks, Tracy.